Or paint stripper, sorry,
And it doesn't contain any of the harmful chemicals like methylene chloride, which are, damaging to the ozone layer. This type of
That's
thing.
wonderful, because I always feel, well, I don't throw my paint strippers out, but it's what to do with them. You've got to take them out to the recycling place, and a lot of people don't bother. They'll just throw them out and feel guilty about it. So this is certainly worthwhile. You also have a very interesting and tasty line of cleaning products made from oranges and coconuts.
Yes, that's right. One of the chemicals that's gained a lot of prominence in the last few years is made from squeezing out orange rinds, and so we use that quite a lot, and also to some of derivatives made from coconut oil are mixed in similar to what you'd find in hair shampoos, this type of thing. And so we've come up with a line of products that are used for anything from cleaning firemen's turnout gear, and one job that we just did recently was cleaning a runway at Vancouver Airport.
Now that's incredible. With coconut oil and orange rinds that you can clean the runway of the airport?
Well, it didn't get it that clean, but it sure smelled good afterwards.
I'll bet it did. So it's wonderful to see such alternatives to the harsh chemicals.
Right. Well, they're very, very picky about what they use, of course, at the airport because of the water table.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea there is to try and take the rubber from the runway so as that when the planes land on it, they don't skid. And then after the runway's been cleaned, they send a machine in and they test it then to see if it has the right amount of friction or whatever.
Great. So Vancouver's going to have the best smelling runways
That's right.
in the world.
You probably.
Yeah. Now this is very nice that you're doing this, because I know this year the ozone has been the lowest ever, and there's a lot of PCBs and methyl chlorides and chemicals going up from things like paint thinners into the ozone. How many businesses are taking a step like yours, Brian, and trying to lessen their use of PCBs?
There's quite a few. PCBs are not so much the issue as chlorinated solvents. As far as the ozone layer is concerned, because DuPont are one of the largest manufacturers, but you can't just turn around an industry like that that's got so much momentum until there's suitable alternatives found for it. So it's going to be 5 to 10 years before chlorinated hydrocarbons are more or less phased out completely, and we just really sort of have to hope and pray that it's not too late by then, because nobody really knows exactly where we're on in that time frame, how much time we've got left, and whether we've already gone past that point right now.
So we're just going to have to wait and see, because the chemicals do hang around up there for many years.
That's right.
So it's going to take us another 20 years to repair the damage.
Could be. Yeah.
Well, let's hope that it's not as bad as we think it is.
Well, we hope so. Most of the time, it always seems that nature always surprises us with its ability to repair itself, so we'll just have to hope this is the same thing here.
Okay. Now, you've been, for many years, involved in environmental concerns, or many years ago you were quite active in pollution control in the 60s.
Yeah.
What were you doing then?
Well, back in the 60s, one of the first jobs I got involved in then was cleaning up the Mercury in Howe Sound. At that time, FMC Chemicals, which were up there, had discharged a fair amount of mercury into Howe Sound, and in all fairness really to them, people really didn't know in those days that mercury was as bad as it was, and so by the time they found out, the damage had already been done. So we managed to install a system for capturing the mercury and stop it from getting into Howe Sound, and in fact the amount of mercury that we were discharging after that was actually less than the amount of mercury that's normally found in rainwater anywhere. So very effective system.
Incredible. People were less aware about environmental concerns then, surely, in the 60s. Have we improved? Has our thinking improved?
Absolutely. I mean, nowadays environmental issues, they're front and center, even as far as politicians are concerned, whereas in those days, that certainly wouldn't have got any politicians elected.
You have an interesting story of the 60s. Can we talk about that? The collision of the two freighters and the response?
Right. Yes, I think that was in about 1974, I believe.
Oh, was it? Okay.
There was two freighters. One was called the Sun Diamond and the other was called the Erawan, and somehow or other they got in each other's way out in English Bay, and the one freighter hit the other freighter so hard it put about a 100-foot gash down the side of the one freighter, and because oil spilled all out over English Bay. There was dead ducks everywhere, and they all went into False Creek and covered all the boats. And at the time I was working with another fellow who'd invented a system for mopping up oil spills, and the basis of the system was that it was coal powder, and it was sprayed on top of the oil, and it soaked the oil up and turned it into asphalt so you could pick it up with a fork, and then it could be burnt like fuel. So it was a great system. Worked really well. So we offered this system to the government and said, would you like us to put some coal dust on it and we'll mop the whole thing up. So this was on a Friday afternoon, I forget, about 3 o'clock. So they said, well, we'll phone you back and let you know. So we sat by the telephone, and
you're offering these free services?
Oh, anything free. I mean, obviously we had our own motives. We wanted some publicity, but
sure.
we knew the stuff would work. So anyhow, around 5:30, 6 o'clock, we phoned and said, well, what's the word? And they said, oh, everybody's gone home for the weekend now.
How things have changed. And this was the government. They were that unconcerned about an oil spill.
Right in English Bay.
Yeah. Well, our thinking has come a long way, but also have we come a long way in more environmental damage now, Brian, than was around in the 60s?
Well, unfortunately, population itself dictates that.
Yeah.
There's just no way to avoid it. But most of the environmental damage, myself, I feel, is probably reversible. But there's one or two things that do bother me, that they may not be reversible, and one is the ozone problem. Of course, the other one is cutting down all of these forests in South America. Now, I know that has, the rate of deforestation has decreased, but at the same time, we're really still playing with things that we honestly don't know the answers to right now.
Do you think the situation nowadays would be better if the thinking had been different, say in the 60s and earlier? There are situations that might have been averted if people had paid attention?
Yeah, I think it would have done, but I think you have to go back further than that. You have to go back further to the 50s, really.
Yeah.
The sort of explosion in the use of chemicals really came after the Second World War, and plastics were invented, this type of thing. So it really goes back a long way.
Okay, we're going to leave the environment for a bit and get on to your musical background. I'm sure a lot of people just listening to that lilt will not have a hard time guessing where you're from. Can you tell us?
Oh, we're Liverpool.
Liverpool. And of course, most people, when they think of Liverpool, think music.
Yeah.
So as a teenager, you were involved in music. Can you tell us?
Yes, I was involved in a few rock groups back in Liverpool at the time. It was pretty hard in those days to come from Liverpool and not be in a rock group.
Why music? Why?
Well, I don't know really why Liverpool ever
was it an escape?
Became famous. I think I think part of it was the fact that the kids were pretty poor there. Most of them were from working class backgrounds, and so they made their own musical instruments out of tea chests and washboards and old guitars and this kind of thing, and got what they used to call skiffle groups going in those days. And then after that, when the Beatles came along, why everybody in Liverpool picked up a guitar between the ages of about 16 and 20, and there was just literally hundreds of groups.
Now you were playing with a group that was fairly well known, the Merey Beats?
Yeah, I did a short stint with the Merey Beats and another group called the Four Quarters. We had several different groups.
And you played alongside, I hate to bring this up because everyone must really ask you about the Beatles, and I never was really a big fan of the Beatles, but I know people out there will want to hear this, so we'll have to bring it up just briefly, okay? Sure. But you did play alongside the Beatles,
we played
and the early Beatles.
Yeah, we played at quite a number of venues that the Beatles were playing at. They would be top bill, of course, not us, but anyway, of course, you sort of got to know them all.
Yeah, you got to know them, and of course everyone's wondering what were they like.
Well, in those days, of course, it was a different group really from what it was that most people know. They had two other people that were in the group. One was called Stuart Sutcliffe, and he died. And then the other was a drummer called Pete Best. And Pete, I guess Pete didn't get on too well with Brian Epstein, the manager, so to cut a long story short, he turfed him out. And they got Ringo Starr in, or Richard Starkey is his name, from another group. And that formed the nucleus of the Beatles then. And in fact, in the early records, that's not even Ringo playing the drums, that's another guy.
Is that right?
That they had standing in, because he wasn't good enough to make records then. So they got a studio musician in there to fill in for him. But they were just regular guys, I think I liked Paul the best out of the lot.
You must have read my mind. You did. Why?
I guess Paul's background was probably more similar to my own, really, in a lot of ways. He was definitely the musician in the group. Obviously, John was the lyricist in the group. Also, too, George, I really liked George. He was a very quiet, sort of shy person, really. And George's mother gave the group a lot of support as well.
Great. You weren't, you say that John's been a bit overrated. He wasn't The great person that.
Well,
that he,
it's sort of like criticizing
Yeah.
God. You can't.
I know. Well, go ahead.
Well, you know.
You knew them. I mean, he was.
John was very much his own man, you know, and I think a lot of the time he probably spent being concerned for himself more so than a lot of other people. Whereas I wouldn't say that about the other guys. John was a bit more self-centered, I'd have to say, than that.
I felt that. I didn't know them, but I think it comes across. Okay, what? So that was a really exciting time to be around, to be young and playing in Liverpool, when everything was just happening. How is the rock scene changed?
Nowadays.
Yeah, nowadays.
Just to give you an idea, then, I can remember we were sitting in the band room of the Cabin, which is Liverpool's top nightclub at the time, and the Beatles had bought their first record out, and we heard this demo disc. I think it was Please Please Me, or one of those records like that, and everybody heard it and thought it was great, and somebody said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had ended up knowing someone that became as famous as Elvis did one day? Everybody laughed and said, oh, well, there's no way that'll ever happen, because nobody from Liverpool had ever made a record in those days.
Yeah.
And anyway, of course, it happened, and the Beatles appeared on BBC TV, and we did a few TV shows, and at the time, I think we got paid something like £200, I think, for a TV lunchtime show between 4 people. It was probably worth about $500 or $600 at the time. And then the Beatles went to play in Shea Stadium, which was their first big American venue, and they got paid, I believe it was £60,000, and we just couldn't believe it. We said, do you know the Beatles are getting £60,000 for that? And nowadays, you look at what the groups are making. I mean, they're just getting millions and millions of dollars. I mean, that is the biggest single change, is the amount of money, and of course the equipment. At the time, our equipment, we could pretty well load everything that our group owned inside of a sort of a small furniture van, and
As
away
did
we
the early
went.
Beatles also.
Right.
Yeah,
sure we
it was
did.
very simple.
Our amplifiers, you could put them on the table.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I went to watch one group a while ago, and they had 144 speakers and about 6 giant furniture vans full of equipment. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of stuff they've got now.
Yeah. Interesting perception.
Yeah.
So, Brian, you left music, and you went on to university in chemistry. Why?
Well, I guess at the time, in the 60s back home, there was a big demand for technical people, and everybody said, you know, you have to go and be a scientist of some kind to get a job, and you know, there's a lot of pressure for you to really study sciences. So I guess chemistry always fascinated me. I like playing with test tubes and making smells in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Really didn't know what I was doing, but it was fun anyway, so I just sort of got dragged into it.
It was during this time that you invented a poison.
Oh yeah.
A poison.
Didn't sound too good.
No, but it was actually good that it didn't kill mice, but it killed rats.
Yes, it was there was quite a demand, and I guess there probably still is, for a poison that would only kill rats, that wouldn't kill any other animal, because
domestic.
A fair amount of the world's food supply is actually spoiled due to rat infestations and things like that, grain that can't be eaten. So what they're looking for is a poison that they could kill rats around the farmyard and this type of thing, so if any other animals ate the rat afterwards, they wouldn't get secondary poisoning from them. So this is a project I worked on for a while, and so we came up with a poison that would give rats a heart attack, more or less.
And you have an interesting story out of this. You were offered a job in the States.
Yeah,
Can you tell us?
I quit that company, and a short while later on I got an offer from Arthur D. Little in Boston, and anyway, that was in the 60s, and at the time I was a bit concerned that I might get drafted to go to Vietnam, because I'd been told that if you went to the States, they always drafted foreigners first. So when I inquired about my situation there, they said, oh, well, you know, you're not going to get drafted because you're on a government program, working for the government. So I said, well, what exactly am I going to be doing? So after a lot of foot shuffling and furtive glances, it turned out that they wanted me to work on their chemical warfare program.
Lovely.
So I said, well, no, that's not for me.
Yeah, good for you. So you turned up a big paycheck.
Well, really, I found myself sort of stranded over here, and that, so I came over to Canada, and
what was life like when you arrived in Canada?
Oh, pretty interesting. I really didn't have a place to stay, so I slept in the back of a beer truck at Molson's Brewery out in New Westminster for a while. It's pretty cold, and I had a can of peas, and I used to get my food by robbing the supermarket. Go around and eat all these raw vegetables, and then push the truck in the corner, and away I'd go. And eventually I just happened to go up to Simon Fraser one night to watch the sun go down, and was leaning over the wall, and I got talking to a fellow up there, and he asked me what my credentials were, and I told him, and that was, I think, Friday night. And Monday I had a job teaching, so I was very lucky.
So you were teaching chemistry?
Yeah, for about 2 years up there.
Did you enjoy it?
Oh, loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, SFU was a great place to be in those days. A lot of rebel rousers, you know, when the students invaded the faculty building there and held it up. And one night I was acting in a play. I think it was Coriolanus, one of these Shakespeare things.
You were acting in a play?
Yeah, I just had a very small part. That's all, just a little bit part. And we had all of these headdresses and feathers and things on the makeup, and we knew that the RCMP were going to be coming up and busting all the students in the building. And of course the media there were there to record the event, so all of the TV cameras were there. Anyway, knowing what little they did, they had the TV cameras set up outside the theatre instead of the admin building. So as soon as we heard the news, the dress rehearsal for the play stopped, and we all rushed outside, all dressed up in our warfare paint and what have you.
Advertising the play.
And all of the cameras clicked, because they thought we were the students coming out of the building, and there was our picture on the front page of the newspaper the next day, and people were looking and saying, just look at these radical students, the way they're dressed up and everything like that. Of course it had absolutely nothing to do with it.
Was it advertising for the play, or did they think to the end that you were the rebels?
Yeah, they thought that we were the students that were occupying the building, because they had the cameras set up outside the wrong building, and that was it. So it's pretty funny to see our face on the paper in the morning.
I'll bet it was.
They really got that one screwed up.
So did you do a lot of theatre at this time?
No, I didn't do any. No, that was just I had about 3 lines in the play. I think that was the extent of my acting ability.
Yeah. Okay, so after SFU came the stint as environmental consultant for various companies, and we already chatted about that, the oil spill and that. And then one day you were sitting in your office, and this was another change that came around. I mean, things in your life just happen. Brian, you decide this is what you want to do, and can you tell us about that?
Well, it was a really nice day, and as I said to you earlier, I have a very limited attention span. After about a couple of years, I was really looking for something different. So one day I was looking at all these flags flying outside, and I thought, boy, if I was a millionaire today, I'd really like to be out sailing. So I think within a few days I'd quit that whole chemistry thing, about 11 years of chemistry, and bought myself a boat kit, a hull and deck. And
so you just there and then quit your job, bought the boat kit?
Bought the boat kit, put it in the backyard, and spent about the next 15 months building this boat. And when the boat was finished, I took that out and started up a sailing school with it.
What was it like building a boat in your backyard? What did the neighbours say?
Well, it was pretty funny actually, because my neighbour was a Dutchman, and of course, you know, Dutch are really keen sailors.
Right.
I mean, thank God he was too, because one day we put the mast up and we hadn't secured the rigging on it, and before somebody got the last screw in, the mast fell over and wiped out all his fruit trees and made a huge hole in his lawn. I thought we were going to catch hell for it, but he ran out and offered to help us fix the darn thing back up again. So it was
lucky you had an understanding neighbour,
really,
like you say, a keen sailor.
He was very good.
Yeah. Did you? How was it following a kit? I mean, you hadn't had any previous experience in boat building.
No. I just had to go and ask everybody how to do the jobs.
A lot of trial and error.
Yeah, a lot of error too.
Okay, so you finished your boat and then you opened your sailing school. Can you tell us which one?
Yeah, that was called North Shore Sailing School in those days, and we also had Kitsilano Sailing School too. And then we changed the name. We were on Lonsdale Avenue for quite a few years, and then in the same billing as North Shore News. And then we moved downtown to False Creek, and we changed the name to Seawing Sailing School.
Right. What was the sailing scene like in those days?
Oh, it was great.
Was the in thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really the in thing. Skiing had really been the in thing in the early 60s, and then in the early 70s, sailing really became popular. I guess it was partly a sort of a mark of the times. Really, people had more money to spend in those days, and the single scene was big. People weren't staying at home and having kids like they are now. Yeah. So everybody was out wanting to have a good time, and sailing just fit the bill. I can remember when the very first fuel crisis hit. Remember when the Arabs put the price of the oil up? Well, I had people lined up for sailing lessons. I was on the second story of the building, right down the stairs and right down Lonsdale Avenue to the corner of the block, lined up for sailing lessons. We just couldn't sign people up fast enough.
Why was that?
Well, because everybody figured in those days that we were going to run out of gasoline within about 2 years.
So they wanted to get their certification in.
Sure. People all wanted to learn to sail, and they were advertising kits for people with powerboats to put masts on them and this kind of thing. Because they all never ran out. So.
You've got during your sailing school days, you've got some interesting stories about the jumpers.
Yeah.
Sort of sad but interesting.
Yeah,
Can you tell us who the jumpers were?
Well, I remember one day, it was rather ironical, we were holding an instructor's course one day, and part of the program for the instructors was to teach man overboard drill, how to pick up somebody if they fell over the side. Anyway, we were motoring out, I guess it was on a Sunday afternoon about 1 o'clock, underneath Burrard Street Bridge, and we had a flotilla of boats, and the boat that was right in front of me was only about 20 feet in front of me. Suddenly the propeller went clunk, 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 and so we thought he'd hit a log, so he stopped the boat for a second and looked over the back to see what the damage was, and this hand came up out the water with a wristwatch on it, this arm.
Good heavens.
And we just couldn't believe it, and what had happened is just before we'd got there, a woman had jumped off the bridge and gone down in the water.
The Burrard Street Bridge?
Yeah, the Burrard Street Bridge. And just as the boat had gone over, she'd come up underneath the boat and caught herself in the propeller. And of course, you know, the propeller had... well, we weren't sure at that time. We carted over to where the Coast Guard dock used to be. And I can always remember one lady that was in my class who was training to be a nurse at that time, gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and she was pretty badly cut up by the propeller, and it was not a pretty sight without going into the details about it.
Yeah.
I must admit I had a lot of respect for that lady that she was able to do that.
I should say, Brian.
And anyway, the medics came out and they worked on her for about 45 minutes, but she never made it, that particular one. And you know, we turned round and went back to the sailing school and shut the sailing school, and I think we drank the bar dry that afternoon. It took us a long while to get over that.
Yeah, incredible experience.
And there was other people that jumped off it too, but I guess with anything, the first time it happens to you is always worse.
And I know there are many other interesting stories, but as I said, this is only half hour, so we're going to rush you along here. Okay. After 13 years, you decided that was it for the sailing school, and you bought an island.
Yeah.
Which island?
Well, it's called Rabbit Island.
Yeah.
A 40-acre island in between Texada and Lasqueti.
Okay, and what was your plan there?
Well, we're going to open up a fishing resort. So we built a building that resembled an Indian longhouse there, and we built about half a dozen little cabins for people to stay there as well.
And you did a lot of your own cement?
Well, everything pretty well.
Brick making. I'm getting confused with my technical terms. On the beach. You used gravel from the beach to make...
Yeah, well, what actually happened there is that we got a government grant for the project, and the terms of the government grant said that we really didn't have much money allowed for materials. It was all for labour, because it was one of these make-work projects that they had for people that whose UIC had been exhausted. So away we went, and we found a fellow over in Seashop who had a lot. And so we said to him, listen, if you give us the lumber off the lot, we'll clear the lot for you. So we went in, got all the trees knocked over with an excavator and got them down to the beach.
You had your own sawmill?
Yeah, tied them to the back of the fish boat, carted them all the way across the straits and set up a sawmill on the island and milled all these logs and things and built all the cabins with that, and then we dug our own gravel off the beach and made our own concrete.
Quite a
with
stressful undertaking.
Oh, gosh, I tell you, I thought I was going nuts.
Yeah.
And some of the people that I worked with were, I don't know, I guess they weren't what you call the most refined people. I can remember one occasion I'd bought them a barron of beef, and it was a huge big barron of beef, and they proceeded to carve it with a chainsaw.
With a chainsaw?
With a chainsaw, yeah.
Wonderful. So after Rabbit Island, you sold it, did you?
Yeah, I sold Rabbit, yeah.
You'd had enough?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You had a stint in the private packaging business?
Yeah, I was into packaging for a while after that, working for a company, and we made a lot of the no-name products and President's Choice type things that are in the stores.
Right, and you also designed the flags for the Calgary Olympics.
Yeah, we did quite a bit of work for that one. Yeah, it was took us about 6 to 9 months to do that whole project. We decorated up Calgary and Canmore, all of those venues, and I forget, the city of Calgary spent several $1 million just on flags and banners alone.
Well, who knows what next will, where you'll be next, Brian. It's been a colourful career so far. Do you know?
Well, I guess I'd like to run a golf course, but
okay.
A bit beyond my reach right now.
Okay, we didn't have a chance to get into your antiques in restoration, but that's for another interview.
Okay.
Okay? I'd like to thank you for taking time out from Biowash and that to come down and chat with us.
Pleasure.
Best of luck to you.
Thanks, Gloria.
And all your endeavors.
Thank you.
I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Anderson's for providing this lovely setting for the interviews. For contact, I'm Gloria Creighton. Please join us next time.